Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. Ukraine War Frontline update for the 15th of May 2024. If you don't know what the lines on my map mean, please check out the screen on the video at the moment, pause the video. Thanks to JR who has done the mapping update today. What an absolute legend. I had a bit of a mare doing it yesterday, so goodness me. Thanks, buddy. Right, we have obviously a lot of changes to that northern border area in the Kharkiv Oblast, Belgorod Oblast for the Russians, and then some changes in the Avdiivka, Chasiv Yar area, Avdiivka area, and then just a little bit south from there. No other changes to the front line. I'll keep this somewhat quick-ish for me. Right, you can see the two main areas where the Russians have been attacking. Now, there are claims again today that the Russians have slowed down in their attacks in this area, in the amount of land they are taking. We have heard that subsequent days, but I thought yesterday actually they did quite a bit yesterday, even though we heard the same claims, although my update was a 36 to 2 day update, so that could be why it seemed that they took a lot more land. I've got two blue lines here. This bottom one is the Ukrainian positioning. That's the grey zone, as according to Andrew Perpetua. I know there are lots of lines, but hopefully you can manage that one. So all these other lines are the Russian defensive lines that the three different mappers are saying. There's a synthesis that would draw the line somewhere, you know, in the middle of those. Some gains for the Ukrainians around that Zeleny area, which we'd seen the day before, actually. There'd been a bit of a pushback around here, as according to the other mappers as well. And so, yeah, interesting that is the case there. Much larger grey zone, as you can see, according to Andrew Perpetua, stretching for more kilometres than elsewhere on that front line. In fact, let's go and do that. That is a sort of almost 7 kilometre grey zone. Wow. So pretty dynamic across this whole front. Some small gains for the Russians, according to Surrey maps, around Lyoboke, and some gains around, what's this town? Oh, yes, Lukyantsy there. And that's what gets, those two towns get mentioned quite a lot. Let's look at, well, we'll go to Surrey maps first. So those are the claims of the gains for the Russians in that area. I'm just trying to see whether that includes the gains from yesterday. This is sort of 15 hours old, this update. So from the Kharkiv Oblast, the Russian army took full control over Lukyantsy and a series of plantations east of it. In addition, troops advanced south and west of Lyoboke and entered into the northern touches of Litsy. On the other hand, the situation was corrected in Zeleny, so not a counterattack, but corrected. Situation corrected in Zeleny, which continues to be under the control of the Ukrainian army, while Russians are at the northern outskirts of the village. From Kyiv axis, Russian forces took control over Vovchansk and Zaporizhzhia and the forest south of Oritsme. Moreover, troops continue advancing inside Vovchansk. So there's a lot happening in Vovchansk, that town there. So we'll come out of here and move to the right, just to let you know where we're talking about. So Vovchansk is that larger, now mainly evacuated city, or town. The Ukrainians have been working really hard to try and get people evacuated from here. People have been fleeing. It's a bit chaotic, to be perfectly honest. You can see that the mappers agreeing that there are wide-scale gains for the Russians in sort of two particular areas, this one here and then the Vovchansk area, and then further to the east of Vovchansk. Slight rejig there for Andrew Perpetua. I don't know that would be classed as gains, but he would claim that it's more grey zone and the Russians aren't as far into Vovchansk, as is being claimed by my goodness, my mate's just come online and said the Slovakian Prime Minister's been shot. Give me two ticks. Yep, he's been shot and injured. I'm not sure that's going to do any favours to an anti-Russian point of view. It might just fuel that kind of approach. Nonetheless, I'll talk about that. So much is happening today. I'm doing too many breaking news updates as it is. Right. Anyway, so that's what's going on in the northern area. So I'd say that, I mean, we know the Russians are fighting in Vovchansk, so I would imagine that might have been relevant for Andrew's last update, but possibly not at the moment. And we've got some imagery of the fighting going on there. We're going to go to the ISW first. But anyway, so moreover, troops continue advancing inside Vovchansk, taking all the positions north of the Avdiivka and Kolkotsova streets, while other troops advance on the eastern outskirts until the Vovcha River. So what roads they are, I don't exactly know. There is going to be this road here. Yeah, those two streets there. So that's the Avdiivka, and that's the other one there. So Surat Maps has the Russians really very much into Vovchansk as opposed to other mappers. Right. Okay, the ISW Institute for the Study of War American Military Think Tank says the pace of the Russian offensive operations in northern Kharkiv Oblast appears to have slowed over the last 24 hours. The pattern of the Russian offensive activity in this area is consistent with the ISW's assessment that the Russian forces are prioritizing the creation of a buffer zone in the international border area over a deeper penetration of Kharkiv Oblast. So they're not trying to take Kharkiv, and they're not trying to do any deep attack into Kharkiv. They would really struggle, I think, taking all this land back again like they did at the beginning of the invasion. They were able to do, almost surround Kharkiv or get to the edge. They were able to get all the way to Kyiv because the Ukrainians weren't thinking the Russians would invade. The Russians had 250,000 troops or whatever it was, and they just marched almost unhindered to some large degree until it was only kind of the hostile attack at the airport and the fact that they didn't take that. That was a really important component of how the Russians were able to be stopped. History will look back at the key points of this war and how it played out in a way it did, and that's going to be one of them for sure. But I think now when you're talking about Russian advances, you're thinking, right, if you're going to go another 10 kilometers to the south, you will be attrited. There will be mines, and there will be larger fortifications, and there will be the Ukrainians getting expedited equipment now from the US. The US has just given another $1 billion green light to equipment, and that will end up being used, and the Russians are going to struggle if they really are aiming at taking huge amounts of land. So I would agree with the ISW in that conclusion there. Right, as we go on with their analysis, several Ukrainian military officials reported yesterday that they believe the situation in Kharkiv is slowly stabilizing. Ukrainian officials noted that Ukrainian forces have begun to clear Vovchansk by targeting visible Russian assault groups in the settlement. Several Russian and Ukrainian sources also reported the Russian forces are using new tactics in this direction. Smaller assault groups of no more than 5 people to penetrate Ukrainian positions before merging with other small assault groups to unite into a larger strike group. The use of small assault groups, however, may be contributing to higher Russian manpower and materiel losses and slowing the overall pace of the Russian offensive in this direction. If the pace of the Russian operations remains relatively lower, Russian forces will likely focus on consolidating new positions and building out a lateral salient to create a buffer zone in the border area as opposed to pushing further into Kharkiv. So this is about getting that buffer zone, although that's from 11 hours ago, and Russians could be making much more of a go of it today in terms of larger force concentrations attacking, particularly in Vovchansk. If we look at some of the sources here, here's some video footage coming out of Vovchansk of various things being blown up, 740 meters east of goodness me, we could go back and look at lots of things getting destroyed. But anyway, 740 meters east of a previous geolocation, one of 2 burning Russian tanks reported by Butasov, so he's a journalist in the area, as destroyed today by the Ukrainian 57th Motorized and 71st Jaeger Brigades. The first shown up close as a T-72 is at least damaged. The second one on the road is likely a T-80. And then here we have some geolocations of that activity. So let's go and pump that in and see where the Russian forces are, where they've met a bit of friction along the way. I don't know why it doesn't do that sometimes, but anyway, here we go. So that is quite far back. That is, I guess, evidence of activity that may have been taking place yesterday. As we know that there is often a lag between activity taking place and it filtering onto the socials. And a bit more in terms of evidence of what's going on. We can see Russian Telegram channels here showing video shelling of Vovchansk in Kharkiv Oblast with missiles. I have seen in the Belgorod Oblast examples, and we've seen this in Ukraine, where traffic has been stopped in order to allow in the case of Ukraine's HIMARS, to shoot off missiles, and it shows that kind of shoot and scoot element to their operation, just driving up, shooting off and then scooting. We have seen now in Belgorod Russian BM-21 Grads firing off on the roadsides into Kharkiv. So this is where they land, which is Vovchansk. Ukrainian local officials, shelling of Vovchansk in Kharkiv with missiles. Ukrainian local officials said that Russian forces have almost completely destroyed Vovchansk, and the situation is extremely difficult, which is not quite what the ISW were claiming in their thread. Julian Röpke, who is the German journalist for the Bild newspaper, saying this morning that Vovchansk, there is a mounting indication that the situation further deteriorates for Ukrainian defenders. Yesterday's official claims of cleansing is underway in the northern suburbs materialized as PR. He says Russians are advancing in and around the town. Now, he is quite a sensationalist and often a bit of a doomer, but just shows you that there are several narratives playing out here. One where the Russians are just moving fairly consistently through Vovchansk, and one where Ukrainians are saying, don't worry, we've got it under control. We are stabilizing the front line. I would imagine the Russians probably are moving through Vovchansk, but I also imagine they're probably taking quite a few casualties in terms of both machinery and personnel, because the Ukrainians will be hitting them with their own munitions. And I'd imagine you've got quite a lot of Ukrainian drone activity around here, like we've seen everywhere else on the front line. They use that pretty effectively. So I guess we'll wait to see how that plays out for the next 24 hours, see whether there is a stabilization of this sector, or whether the Russians are still moving with the momentum. They do have a great numerical advantage, but of course it completely depends what their objective is. If it is to move through and take land in some kind of more lightning offensive type thing, then expect a very different behavior from them than if it was to just incrementally take land and consolidate it for a buffer zone into Belgorod, so Belgorod can't be hit by artillery so much, and probably more pertinently, so they can hit Kharkiv with their own artillery. They can get within, I guess, Russian artillery isn't exactly fabulous these days, but if they can get within sort of 25 kilometers of the edge of Kharkiv or some of the suburbs of Kharkiv, then they can maybe try and hammer that with their own artillery to add to the rockets and missiles they send and drones they send into the city. Right, so that's Kharkiv. We're going to come down past that northeastern front line. We've got Kupiansk to Svatova to Kreminna there. No change to the front lines there. Reporting from Ukraine talked about what's going on in Serebyansky Forest. Really, truly, I don't know, heartbreaking video footage of this forest just being reduced to just those poles into the air, the tree trunks with no foliage on, no branches. It's just a dead wasteland. It's really apocalyptic. Vast swathes of this forest have been burnt down, have been destroyed. It's so sad. On top of the human lives that have been lost as well, obviously. Seversk, front line, no change. Northern Bakhmut, no change. Then we get to Chasiv Yar, with some changes to this northern area, and in fact to Avdiivka. So the Ukrainians had done a really good job of stopping the Russians from advancing through on this northern point at Avdiivka, that village, fairly long, thin village there. And the the Russians haven't advanced there for some time now. Well, according to Syriac maps and indeed deep state maps, the Russian army has advanced and taken full... No, they haven't. That's not the right... These are the words. The Russian army has advanced west of Avdiivka, taking control over the eastern warehouses of Kalinina and part of the adjacent trenches. So that is advancing through Avdiivka and getting towards Kalinina here and into the trenches around that area. So that is definitely challenging if that has happened, because the Ukrainians have also had a bit of trouble keeping the Russians at bay around the Canal micro-district, at least according to Syriac maps, and also in that southern vector as well. So there are these 3 points of attack, and the Ukrainians are inching forward and inching forward and inching forward. not consistently. It comes in like nothing happened here for ages at the top. It initially did, and then it was all about the middle, then it was the bottom, then a bit of the middle, then the bottom again, and now the top, and it's not all at once, which tells you something. Like, to me, it just says that the Russians don't have enough here to like fully push through. And then this goes back to the whole argument I've been having with myself, really, as to whether this attack in the north is sensible. If they put all of those resources into, say, Chasiv Yar, well, you'd take Chasiv Yar, right? And that's probably, well, again, it depends what their objective is, because I was saying this morning that I think one of the reasons could be to give themselves another bargaining chip for negotiations. But then people are saying Putin really isn't interested in negotiating. He's all about getting as much land as possible. And then I don't know, is that the best use of troops for land, troops for kilometers, material for kilometers? Because that's really what it is. If it's just land, unless there's some really deep operational advantage here, which is buffer zone, attacking Kharkiv, then maybe, yeah, that's a good use of troops. But then, is that more important than taking Kramatorsk and Druzhkivka and Konstantinivka, which is surely what they have to get if they need to get the Donbass? They need those, and they're not going to do those without those 50,000 troops. So I swing from like, oh, that's a crazy idea for the Russians, and then think, okay, there is some rationale for that, and swing back to, no, that's just crazy. There are just competing objectives, and you're going to have the commander around here, the Russian commander around here, going, I can really do with those 50,000 troops, by the way. Like, you've tasked me with taking Chasiv Yar, and at the moment we've been incrementally moving towards the canal, but we haven't even got the canal micro district on the outskirts of Chasiv Yar. So, we need some help here. Meanwhile, you're attacking north of Kharkiv with a whole load of stockpiled equipment and new troops, and we are exhausted in Chasiv Yar. So I don't know. You tell me what you think, as I keep saying. But yeah, Ivanyivska area, no change there today, as according to the mappers. We come down past the New York area and Toretsk to that northern part of the Avdiivka salient here around the Ocheretny area. So this was actually shown yesterday, but added to the map today. That'll obviously come out just after I'd done the mapping. So really no change then to that whole area, which is pretty interesting, because there was a lot of changes yesterday. There were just pins all over the shop. It seems to be somewhat slower today. In fact, the only change to the map in this whole region from other mappers is Andrew Perpetua catching up with the other two mappers. In other words, confirming that the Russians have made those gains. It's not that they have made those gains the last 24 hours necessarily. So actually, it's a really quiet day along this whole area. They might be getting a breather to go again, but again, the argument is, well, if you had 50,000 troops, you could really be making a bid towards Pokrovsk. So, but would a mass of troops around here with the existing Ukrainian defences, artillery, drone units, and so on and so forth, would this have been far more attritional for the Russians than attacking in a brand new place that now it appears wasn't as well defended as, because part of why I was saying this is a crazy area to attack is I was thinking there'd be a lot more artillery put in place. I thought there'd be a lot more minefields in place, not the fortifications. I'm pretty fine with them being further back, although we've seen Dragon's Teeth just lined up on the side of the road. So I think there has been a defensive cock-up in this area, and that then leads to the belief that this might be a better idea than originally thought. But had the Ukrainians had been better organised here, then the Russians, it would have been an even worse decision for the Russians. Did the Russians attack because they knew the Ukrainians weren't so well defended there? That's a question I guess we can ask. Okay, as we come further to the south in this Avdiivka area, as mentioned, Andrew Perpetua catching up there. We have that's in the Umanska area, which is just here. Some gains for the Russians. I don't know whether this was something. Yeah, this is from the 14th, from last night. So I may have included that on yesterday's map. I don't know. I don't think so. But quite often with Surat maps is, even though their tweet of a particular advance comes out at a certain point in time, sometimes it's lagging from when they did the mapping, so they might have actually mapped that 12 hours before. I caught that on my mapping, and then they announced it 12 hours later. That often happens. So anyway, advance in Umanska area for the Russians there, which is already on our map, so it's nothing significant. That would have been from yesterday. So again, no real changes to that frontline area. And then finally, we come down into Krasnohorivka, where there are some small advances for the Russians in the middle, as according to Surat maps, and a little bit of rejigging in the Ukrainian favour for the western side of Krasnohorivka. Deep State map here saying there's an update in Krasnohorivka, so I don't know whether that is just a rejig or the Ukrainians have pushed the Russians back in some kind of localized counterattack there. Not too much to add about that. I don't have any sources for any of these claims from Surat or Deep State other than themselves. No confirming data from anywhere else. And then we come to the southern front line, where, as I mentioned, there's no changes, but I thought I'd add this little nugget in. So the enemy is trying to break through the Ukrainian defences in the Zaporizhzhia sector, but are failing. 99% of enemy attackers are killed. That was stated by the spokesman for the Legion of Freedom, Konstantin Denisov. Quote, as of 6 a.m, the artillery shelling has not stopped. The enemy is firing with everything they have. So yeah, the Russians are very active with their artillery. They are trying to push in these places, but according to this guy, 99% of them are being repulsed, or actually worse than that, killed. So if this Ukrainian spokesman is to be believed, the Russians are dying in very large numbers around here, and that could go towards those very high figures of personnel losses I'm reporting on a daily basis from the Ukrainian General Staff, or it could just be a spokesman trying to big up his unit or his area. It could be psyops, take it with obviously a massive block of salt, but the claims from the Ukrainians are that they are killing 99% of the Russians who are attacking in the Zaporizhzhia front line. So yeah, okay, that's enough from me. Thanks for watching. Please take care of yourselves, and like, share, subscribe, all those kind of things. Really appreciated. Thanks so much. Take care. Speak soon.